always been an exciting time now as things start to look up in the Indian car space, and there has been so much talk about activity from certain players. One particular player in question here is, of course, Nissan, along with its sub-brand Datsun. There has been a fair amount that we've already seen happen, and the good part is there's a promise for a lot of it to come as well. The gentleman who heads the business for Nissan in Africa, Middle East and India is Christian Mardrus, and he speaks to us right now. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here, and welcome to Delhi as well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate, the World Economic Forum, which is a good opportunity to better understand India and also to network with key persons in the country.
I can relate to the second part because we get time with you, so I'm pleased. To start with, of course, give us a sense of the overall scope of business that you look at, because very often when it comes to the automobile space, China starts to sort of eclipse everything else. But when it comes to Asia, the Middle East and Africa, as well as, of course, India, are being seen as the sort of growth drivers for the future, especially Africa and India.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in charge of three different regions, Middle East, Africa, and India. Obviously, the economic situation and the markets are different, but we can see a number of commonalities, especially between India and Africa. Maybe you have seen that more and more. We developed and produce cars in India, of course for domestic market first, but that are exportable more and more, in Africa and in some other countries in the Middle East. So there are some connections between the three areas I'm responsible of. Yeah.
Well, one of the sort of premises on which the Datsun business was brought back was exactly this, where unlike Indonesia and Russia, South Africa was going to be serviced through India as well. So seeing that sort of relationship and seeing the export numbers going up out of Chennai, how encouraging is it for you from a business case perspective?
Well, first of all, we consider that our choice to make our plant in Chennai an export base was a very good strategy. Today more than 100,000 cars are exported every year out of Chennai. I think this year we will hit the record. We'll produce more than 370,000 cars in Chennai, but more than 100,000 will be exported. And if we look at the future, this is a win-win strategy. Our strategy, we want to achieve 5% market share in India in 2020 for Nissan and Datsun together. Of course, we will launch a number of models in order to support this strategy. Those models that will be developed and produced in India will be obviously focusing on the Indian market, but also will be exportable cars for Africa and for some Middle East markets. This is the strategy we have in mind.
So you've talked about 8 cars coming in the next few years.
Yes, you have seen that, yeah.
Yes,
so we are planning 8 new cars in the next 5 years, to support, our market objective of 5% market share. Of course, 8 models, both for Nissan and Datsun together.
And what sort of potential do you see to, increase and enhance the kind of, platform as well as parts sharing? I know that as a strategy, we've already heard from you before that there will be no cross-badging with Renault, but these platforms, would they be specific to just Nissan and Datsun, or could there be some sharing with Renault well under the skin?
No, the common module strategy and the common platform strategy is an alliance strategy. So this will be open to Nissan, Datsun, and obviously Renault. And I think the best example of this strategy is what we have been doing recently between Redigo, the new Datsun cars that has been launched a couple of months ago, and Kwid. Those 2 cars are based on the same platform. They share more than 50% of components, but at the end of the car you have 2 different cars. It's not cross-badging. It's total different concept of cars, but relying on same platforms, which in terms of development, in terms of investment, and also in terms of cost, it's a huge advantage.
When it comes to CMFA, how much of that do you see? How much of that potential is still unrealized, in the sense that, of course, we've seen these 2 cars, they've both been successes, and that's seeming like the tip of the iceberg to us, because there's still a lot that can happen there.
It's just a start. What has been done with CMFA in the last 2 or 3 years is just, the first example of what is possible with this new platform. I would like just to remind you that this new platform was decided in 2011. So it took us less 3 years to develop it. Develop also common engines, And obviously, I mean, this platform will be used more and more, in the coming years for Datsun and for Renault as well. Yeah. So this is just a starting point.
Now in India, of course, the other platform that's had a lot of success is M0, and even there seems to be some more potential. There seems to be a lot more that could still happen because there are various segments that you're still not operating in. There's still various body styles that you don't perhaps offer in the Indian market. Is it fair to say that it's these two platforms that will sort of drive the growth for these 8 new models, or could we be looking at new platforms as well coming in?
No, we may have other platforms, because when you are talking about Nissan, we would like also to localize in India more and more global models of Nissan, which are very successful outside India, like X-Trail. X-Trail, is maybe one of the iconic model we have in a Nissan lineup. We want to import, obviously, X-Trail in India. It's an example. But certainly, you're right, CMFA will be a strong base in terms of platform. M0 or evolution of M0 could be another platform where we can work together with Renault colleagues in India, and you will see maybe in the future some models for India developed on the M0 platform.
Now this point that you made is an interesting one, because very often your critics or critics of any brand always go after this one point, saying it's one thing to produce a lot of cars for the local market with obviously local requirements in mind, but there's also value in bringing in some of your globally successful nameplates, the cars that the brand is known by, the one that it's associated with, and not just the flagships like a GTR, but other cars like now of course the new Micra. How do you balance those two things?
When we look at Nissan is a global brand. So clearly our objective in the next few years is to, I would say, not to develop specific cars for India, to adapt obviously, but to localize some of the global successful models we have in the Nissan lineup outside India, in Europe, in Middle East, in US. Because we don't have to redevelop new cars, and we want to position Nissan at a different level. When we are talking with Datsun is a specific case where we consider that India could be a strong base for the Datsun brand. For India, obviously, but also, as I said, for Africa. When we look at Go and Go Plus now, they are exported in South Africa, they are exported in the right-hand drive countries, will be now exported in left-hand drive. So more and more, Datsun can be developed for India market first, taking into account the Indian characteristics and requirements of the market, but will be exported in many of our countries in the region. Yeah.
And the nameplates like X-Trail, for example, is that always going to be something that remains an import-only strategy, or would you look to start localizing cars like that?
We start to import, but you know that in India, if you want to be competitive, it's just the first step. You have to localize. So certainly, the second step will be localization.
What about all the, there's so much other talk about how India or markets like India offer so much potential in various parts of the market. I mean, now, since there is finally confirmation of, let's say, Lexus coming into India, would you start to look at things like Infiniti as well, or is that too far away?
Well, so far it's not in our plans. We never know what could be the future, but as you know, we are focusing on certain markets today for Infiniti. Of course, Infiniti is strong in US, is growing up in China, growing up in Europe, in Middle East as well. We have Infiniti. We should never say that never, but it's not yet in our plans to introduce Infiniti in India, at least in the short term.
Well, I have to tell you, the new QX range looks really, really sexy.
Okay,
so
good. Thank you.
At some point, it may be interesting. But going back to also then, the point about Nissan's own big brand cars. I mean, if you ask me, then of course I would love to see a Qashqai or a Juke come to India. But how do you then look at a segment like that, which is obviously going to be high volumes, which is going to be extremely competitive, yes, and where there are already a multiple number of products that are coming in from your competitors. So is it going to be important to say that, okay, we can have something that's really, really cost competitive and local, and then also have something which is a little bit more premium and global?
Yeah, absolutely. You will see that maybe we cannot say that we will import Qashqai or Juke, but this is certainly the type of model we want to introduce in India in the short term. And as I said, they will be localized with some adaptation to the local market.
All right,
so it won't be exactly, Juke or Qashqai, some type of similar cars. Yeah,
I mean,
and this is something we'll start with on the Nissan brand.
No, and that's probably true in most markets that they sell in, right? I mean, they would always have something that's specific to the local market or the local regulation requirement as well.
Regulation, obviously, but what we have learned also in the last few years is that in India there are some specific features, specific requirements which are unique to India, and we have to be there, and we have to be adapted to those requirements. So you will see, I mean, the first Nissan cars that will come in the near future, and you will better understand our strategy.
How encouraged are you by all this talk about the new regulations that are coming to India now? I mean, there's both the safety regulations as well as the emissions regime. After much delay, they're finally starting to kick in. Of course, I know your new products will take all that into account, but do you think that gives you an advantage in a sense over some of the better entrenched local players? Because here you are at a position where you are still to bring in all those new models, so it allows you to seed that investment from today?
First of all, I mean, we have all the technology available in our group. So there is no problem in terms of capabilities and technology, both in terms of safety or in terms of emission. Then after, the question is, how do we do it at the best cost? Obviously, if we can anticipate it before we have launched a car, it's much better. So as we are in the process of developing new cars, certainly, I mean, in the new cars we are developing for India, we will introduce those items as day one. It will be much more cost efficient.
This whole talk about doing a lot of cars that are going to be sort of driven by local requirement and therefore possibly specific to India and its conditions and its very demanding buyer. When you talk about a car like the new Micra that was just shown at Paris,
yes.
Are you saying that there is still potential for a product like that, or will we just have a V-platform hatchback and not necessarily the new Micra?
Today we don't plan to introduce a new Micra as it is in India, but we have some plans based on maybe some common components, because the dimension of the car, we consider that the dimensions of the car are fit with the Indian requirements. So not the car as it is, but certainly maybe some derivative of the car available in India in the future. Yeah. This is something we are thinking about.
It does look very promising, I have to say. I mean, considering the big leap it's taken now for the Micra name. But I think where the point that I'd like to understand from you on this is, it's not specific to a Micra, but
yeah.
Let me put it to you another way then. When you talk about the decisions that are being taken for Nissan with its entire global strategy for all the different regions, and of course, there are certain considerations, hopefully, that will kick in by the end of this year, which will affect that strategy. When it comes to all of that, how much of a role does India specifically play towards deciding those decisions?
We have a process within Nissan, and I think it's the same process within Renault. It's a product plan. Every year, I mean, we have product plan review. We want from now on to be able to focus on core models. So we have identified 25 core models for the group on a worldwide basis. Why focusing on a more limited number of core models? Because first, I mean, we cannot dilute our capacities and capabilities of development, and second, because we cannot just bet on new launches, but also we have for each new car, for each model, to provide regular, newness, regular changes. So that's why we want to focus on those 25 core models. India will be one of the key countries for these new core models. And as I said, the only way to make it happen is to be sure that those core models, of course, will fit with India, but will also fit for export. Because, if we have more volumes, obviously this will make it easier. So my strategy for the region is to develop and produce cars in India for India first, but then after to be sure that those cars will be exportable in my countries.
So it's not a contradiction then. What you're saying is that within that 25, even these new products that you talked about for India, and of course with an export potential, fit into that larger strategy.
Absolutely. That's why on the Nissan range, we want to not only develop brand new cars for India, but we want to import We want to take the global models which are successful outside and localize them in India and adapt them. On the Datsun front, you know, it will be a little bit different. We will develop brand new cars that will be exported from India in the rest of the region.
But specific to Nissan and Datsun, could that just change or be tweaked a little bit, you think, based on certain global decisions that are pending?
For example?
In the sense that if Nissan's strategy starts to alter, in, you know, in terms of how these cars are being produced or whether there is any, you know, expansion to the alliance, is that something that could also then bring India a little bit more key or more central to this larger strategy?
But you know, India will be certainly in the coming years the main source base for passenger cars in my region. I really want to develop, you know, our capabilities in India, not only in terms of production but also in terms of development, in order to make India, you know, our main source for passenger cars.
All right, so one last thing then, I think, which sort of brings all of this together. You've, of course, always talked about the kind of market share you'd like to go after, and you've said that today as well. But market share is one thing, which is, of course, related strictly to volume and also the promise that the market will continue to grow the way it's supposed to.
Yes.
But Nissan as a brand, and then again Datsun as a brand in India, it's not as if they're not well-known brands today. They're pretty well-known. What's the kind of position you'd like for them to occupy, and do they necessarily need to go hand in hand going forward, or do you see a bigger separation between them?
I mean, each brand should have its own territory. So we want to clearly separate, you know, Nissan and Datsun. As I said, you know, Nissan, we want to, in fact, you know, we want Nissan in India to be what Nissan is outside India. So certainly, I mean, a little bit higher segment as it is today. Datsun is different. Datsun, you know, there are some specific requirements. There are risers. We have new customers, first-time buyers, and Datsun is focusing on these customers. So clear separation between the brand in terms of style, clear separation in terms of pricing, obviously. Of course, Datsun also will benefit from the technology of the group. We should never forget that Datsun is part of Nissan. So even, you know, Datsun will have its own personality. Datsun is part of the Nissan group. Datsun is a Japanese brand, and Datsun will also benefit from the best of our technology. And I think we still have some work in order to improve our communication on this side.
Well, it's something that we'll certainly look forward to and watch it all unfold. Mr. Mardrus, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you very much.
All the very best.